I think what I learned from that experience was that I didn't do my diligence on them. They had invested in maybe 4 women ever. And not to say that I couldn't have been the fifth, but it's really important as the person who's pitching in whatever capacity to know who you're pitching to. And since then, I profile people who I'm pitching now, and not to be a creep, but because I want to know, like, is this person worth talking to? And I did not do that time.
Hey there, Pitches. Thanks for tuning in to the inaugural episode of Pitched. I am your host, Angie Trueblood, and I am super pumped to be sharing our new format and focus with you. If you are new here, welcome. I am a podcast guesting and hosting expert and the founder of the Podwize Group, which is a concierge podcast interview booking agency. Basically, we're obsessed with pitching. If you are an OG listener, hello. I hope you love this iteration of the show and that you find it as helpful and useful and fun as you did our previous version. So today's episode is Pitched, a Femtech product to a room full of dudes. A bit of context, and then we will dig in. You might be wondering what the heck a Femtech product is. I know that I thought that when today's guest and I connected years and years ago. Technically, it refers to diagnostic tools, products, services, wearables, and software that use technology to address women's health issues. And these issues can range from menstrual health, reproductive health, sexual health, maternal health, and menopause. So that's what we're talking about, the type of product. Now, the beautiful soul that is sharing today's pitch example is Kristen Carbone, and she is the founder of a company named Brilliantly, which produces a Femtech product named Brilliantly Warm. So she'll share a bit more about the product, but the gist is that it is a smartphone-enabled wearable that can slip into any bra for a safe, flexible, natural-feeling warmth. And if you're wondering how long the company has been around, it's hard to put an exact date on a tech company. Like, do you count from the first time you had the idea or the first prototype or the first sale? For perspective, I first met Kristen back in 2018 when she was just starting to build community around the concept of Brilliantly and the potential of creating this type of product. And now it is on the market, wonderfully enough. So hopefully that provides a little background as we kind of dig into this conversation with Kristen. But first, it's time for our podcast love of the week. Now, today's podcast love of the week is interesting. It's actually a podcast that I have not listened to for more than one episode. And that is because I thought it could be really interesting for you, the listener, to dig in a little bit more to Kristen's story. So she and I are going to get into a specific pitch that she made, the results of that, her takeaways. But I love a good startup story, especially from a woman founder. And so she has several interviews out there where you can hear her journey from idea and concept to actually bringing the product to market. A great episode to give that listen to is a show called Meant for It. And the podcast episode title is Brilliantly Warm founder Kristen Carbone shares her startup story. So I will link to that in the show notes, but you can just put her name, Kristen Carbone, and whatever player you are listening to this podcast in, and look for the show Meant for It. And it should come up under the episode list. So if you are intrigued and as wonderfully obsessed with Kristen as I am after you hear her, go listen to the whole story because it's pretty incredible. All right, let's dig in. So keep an ear out during this discussion about what Kristen learned from this experience, as it ended up being super relevant to any kind of pitch, whether you're pitching for funding, pitching for partnerships, or pitching for podcast interviews. It's something that I have always shared as a must do. No, I did not pay her to say it, but it was really exciting to hear her echo my own thoughts about pitching. Okay, without further ado, let's hear what happened when Kristen pitched a Femtech product to a room full of dudes. All right, Kristen, I am so excited to have you on and to dig into one of your stories of pitching. And thank you for being the inaugural pitch story. I'm very excited to have you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I always welcome the opportunity to share parts of my story that might help some future women.
Yes, exactly. All right. So let's kind of set the stage for listeners. I know in your mind you have a specific experience of pitching.
Yeah.
Share a little bit about Brilliantly and kind of out of the gates what the perceived niche was.
So we make a technology product that was originally designed for women in the breast cancer community. One of the side effects from breast implant reconstruction is coldness. So for anyone listening, if you can imagine that you wouldn't have any breast tissue, but you would be walking around with like essentially a water balloon on your chest, that it's acting like any, and I'm holding up my coffee here, like any material in the world where it's trying to equalize between the two things it's up against. And so they're literally cold to the touch because they're not insulated. There's not much blood flow around them, and they make you feel cold all over. I had a preventative mastectomy 10 years ago and really started designing it for myself. But before I started doing that, I talked to hundreds of women to understand the problem, what they would want from a product. And of course, in those conversations and in those years where I was just kind of doing research, lots of women who I talked to were like, well, I want it because my kids play baseball in the Northeast in the spring, or my son plays ice hockey and I have to sit at the rink. And, there were all of these different people who were illuminating the other opportunities. So I knew early on that we were going to have lots of people who were interested in a product that was invisible under your clothes and controlled by an app that kept you warm. I like to describe it now as like an invisible puffy vest. And we all know the sensation of like putting on a puffy vest. And even though it's not covering your head and your hands, like warming your core increases your blood flow and makes all of you feel warmer.
Yeah. Let's set the stage a little bit as to why this pitch was something that was important to you. What was the role it was playing in your business? And like, where were you at that moment?
Totally. So it was really early on in my business. And this was an angel group that purports to support really early stage businesses. And it's important for me because it was such a failure. And I think you just learn more when you really don't do well. When you go in and you have a really successful, and we're talking about pitching to investors for an early stage femtech company. But when it goes well and someone invests, like there's not much to tell. You can like have a toast and move on and do it again. It's the bad ones that become the learning opportunity.
Well, and I would imagine it's the bad ones that you really pivot from and make pretty significant adjustments. Just to get the lingo straight. So it was an angel group. What's an angel group for listeners that might not have gone through this?
Yeah, that's a really good question. There's lots of different ways that companies can get funded so they can start. And depending on the kind of company you are, you need a different type of funding. And I guess that's my first thing that I would share with your listeners is to really make sure that you understand what kind of money you need to support the kind of business you have and the lifestyle that you want, because different types of money are going to mean very, very different things to you.
Okay.
So angel investors are individual people who invest. So I could say, Angie, I have this company. I think that you might be interested in supporting it. And you might individually, as Angie, write me a check from your personal or your family trust, but it's an individual person. An angel group is a group of individuals who are still investing their own money. And that's different than a venture capital group. A venture capital group, which is like what you hear about when you read about startups, are groups that also fundraise. So they have what's called LPs, which is limited partners. So they're also talking to, in theory, angel investors who are investing into funds that usually have a thesis, like this one is going to support fintech companies. This one's going to support female founders. And then there's people who work for that fund who deploy that capital to specific promising businesses. But the people who are making the decisions about which companies to invest in are not investing their own money. They're investing out of a pool of money from individuals.
Okay, got it. Was there a decision that you made to go with an angel group instead of a different type of funding?
Well, I should say I learned a lot from after this pitch, but I knew that I wasn't ready for venture funding. My total addressable market was perceived to be a niche market, which I still don't believe is true. Like, people didn't understand the size of the opportunity, and I wasn't good at communicating it really early on. But the early pitch and the early business were really focused on the breast cancer community. And 1 in 8 women in the US gets breast cancer. And not all of those women get implant reconstruction, but that's a lot of women. And
Yeah.
it's a huge long-term quality of life problem. It's not something that happens for like a moment post-op, or, there were all of these other products and things that get funded and get attention that are for a specific moment in time. And I was trying to position the business really around the opportunity in previvorship, which is what they call women who have preventative mastectomies, or survivorship, because we're getting better, thankfully, at keeping women alive longer. But I was like, let's make sure they're comfortable and have a really nice life.
Yeah. Yeah. Shocking.
Yeah. And I think there were people who really, I have very rarely met someone who didn't know someone who was affected by breast cancer. But I think in terms of an opportunity market and how much money people are going to spend and all the things that I, to be totally honest, felt yucky talking about early on, I was like, I just want to help these people. Help me help these people. Like, why is this about how many pennies on the dollar? It felt like a really gross conversation that I wasn't ready to have. So I knew I couldn't play in the league with venture capitalists, that I needed to refine my pitch and talk to people and get people who really believed in me and the mission and the cause that I wanted to serve, who weren't going to want me to figure out how to charge women like $1 more a set.
Yeah. Yeah. So you felt like it made more sense to have like a personal pitch and to connect personally with the people that would be writing the checks, correct?
Yeah, because when you pick an investor, whether it's like getting a bank loan or VC money or an angel, you're picking your boss.
Yeah.
And I really wanted to be able to say, like, I'm working this hard to help this community of women, but also to make you, Angie, a return on your investment. And that felt good. Like, I knew who I was working for. And most of the people who very early on were supporting me were friends and friends of friends and people who really got it, or people who had the problem themselves.
Yeah. Okay.
So angel groups, like, where I could look somebody in the face and be like, let's connect, let's talk about this on a human level, just felt better for me.
Well, and I remember when we worked together, that was a big angle of you just getting the word out and connecting with communities and creating that sense of community for women in that space that it wasn't really there. So yeah, it makes sense that that's the angle that you would go. Talk a little bit about why you were at a point to where you needed funding. I mean, obviously creating a Femtech product, it doesn't sound cheap.
Yeah. I wish I hadn't needed money. There's a lot of businesses that you can bootstrap, and bootstrap is the term for like doing it yourself.
Yeah.
Where you can take a little bit of money out of your savings account and figure out how to stretch that far until revenue comes in. But when you're making a physical product, and our product is a connected wearable, so it's something that, 1, goes on your body, and 2, also has a software component, so it's controlled by an app. And making something that is high enough quality that I can say is safe to put on someone's body is expensive. It requires testing. It requires like a very rigorous process of not only testing the component parts, but having potential customers wear it, try it, give us feedback.
Yeah.
Because so many people have to touch it, from many different types of engineers to the different people who manufacture the different parts of it. It's frankly just expensive. Like, the molds to get the plastic housing that hold the battery, some of the quotes for that were like $20,000. And there are some people who can pay for things out of pocket, but on average, commercializing a physical product takes $1 million.
Wow. Okay. You were at a point to where you needed cash. What was the stage that you were in? Was it to develop and test, like to almost create like a prototype?
Yeah, that's exactly where I was. So this
Okay.
was early on, like the pitch I want to tell you about is early on. We were idea phase. We'd done some testing where we took off the shelf things and had women like tell us about like when they felt it, what materials felt good, like did a lot of exploratory stuff. So we had a plan for
Mm-hmm.
what was going to happen next. But we didn't have the product ready or even a working prototype.
Okay.
I was trying to get funding to get to the next milestone, which in this case was a working prototype that was our design that we could then test with people.
Okay. So tell us about the group that you were going to pitch. Like, how did you come to know them? How did the opportunity even present itself to you?
Yeah, first let's start with a cautionary tale, which is if you have an idea that's good, and a lot of people do, and a lot of times the idea that you have is something you can't execute on your own. So you need to get mentors or a co-founder or someone to help you. And I got a lot of people to help me early on because I knew I needed a lot of help as a former museum curator. I'm not an engineer, I'm not a technical person, I'm not a business person. I needed a lot of support
Yeah.
and got connected to someone who connected me to this angel group. So it felt like a really good vetted intro.
Mm-hmm.
And that person has revealed themselves to not actually really be my advocate. So the cautionary tale here is that if you're going to take on advisors and mentors, don't give them equity right away. Think of it like dating. And this is the same for investors, that you like get to know them. You make sure you like working together, that you trust their opinion. Because if you immediately give someone like advisor equity, which is a thing that happens all the time, and it goes south, you're stuck, or there's a lot of legal fees to get rid of them.
Yeah.
So thankfully, this person had asked for equity, and I was like, hold on a minute. And then they did a handful of shady things, and we parted ways, and there was no lawyers that needed to get involved in that,
Yeah.
thankfully.
So that's the person then that introduced you to this group.
Yes. Angel groups, there's lots of different ways that they function. And post COVID, sometimes it's just a Zoom call with a group of people. And this was pre COVID. So it was like they were together for a day, all of these people who were part of the angel group.
Mm-hmm.
And they were hearing 10-minute pitches from founders all day. So I was somewhere in the middle of that day. And you can imagine, like, this group in particular is older men, and they were probably tired by the time
Yeah.
I got there. And I went in, and this is just one of those things that I think is like particularly feminine. And I'm guessing that your audience is mostly women.
Yes.
So they'll probably understand. I went in on like a humid summer day. And for the people listening, you can't see, I have like big hair. And so it was like extra big and wild, and there's no chance of controlling it. And I was in like a black linen outfit. And I walked into a room full of like 10 or 12 men, all in like khaki pants and navy blazers, like really tidy. Some had bow ties on. And I was like, oh, I feel like I'm coming in to get burned at the stake. Like that was the thought I had when I walked into the room. Like, this is a room I don't belong in.
Right.
And I think that's one of those feelings that now when I feel that way, I pivot my expectations. I don't walk out of the room. Well, sometimes I do, like if I'm walking into a room and I feel like threatened. But when it's
Right.
a room full of investors where the vibe isn't at all a group that I want to work with, I know, like, okay, this is low stakes because I'm going to say no anyway, even if they are interested.
How much of that feeling do you think came from this being one of the first pitches that you had really gone into? Like, how much of it was you probably psyching yourself out a little bit versus the actual room and how those men welcomed or didn't welcome you?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Angie, because I think I'm now remembering I had this like pre-pitch ritual where I'd listen really loudly to David Bowie's Under Pressure, like to psych myself up. I am a very comfortable public speaker, and I don't get particularly nervous ahead of pitches, and I had done some, and I had had some pretty awful experiences because I was talking about breasts and about sensation, where when I was meeting, especially individually with some men, where they would say some really terrible things to me. And I think because it was a group, I assumed everyone would behave, right?
Yeah.
Like, my joke is there's no HR department in fundraising. There's no one there to protect you if something goes wrong. And the way that you might interact with someone one-on-one typically is insulated when there's a group. Like, you have to behave yourself because you're with your colleagues or whatever.
Yeah. Okay.
So I think there probably was a little, this wasn't like, I think now I would walk into any room and be like, all right, let's throw down and not care as much. So the stakes felt a little bit higher then, but I think I immediately knew that it wasn't good.
These are not my people.
But I still really, really wanted their money.
Yeah.
And now I would know that I don't. I think I've learned that even if they had offered it, I should have said no regardless. Mm-hmm. But thankfully, they didn't give me that opportunity to make that mistake.
Oh my God, this is going to get good. Okay. So you go in, you're the witch, and take it from there.
Yeah, I got my black cat and my cauldron and my broom. Yep. And like some of them were, as soon as I started talking, like they looked at me and two of them picked up their phones and just were like completely not paying attention.
What?
One started looking out the window. One stopped me in the middle. So it was, the format was like a 10-minute pitch and 10 minutes of questions. So in the middle of my 10 minutes, this guy was just like, I don't understand why you're not just making X. Like as if, and I was like, okay. So then I ended up spending the rest of the time that I should have been pitching answering this question, which was, why wasn't I making a bra? The product that I make is called Brilliantly Warm, and it fits into any bra because your listeners will know, and you will know, and I know that you want to wear a different bra all the time. Yeah. You don't want to wear the same bra every day. And the look and style and size of finding the bras that fit you, that you feel really good in, is a very hard thing to do. And if
that's a totally different business, like a totally different model and what you have to figure out.
Totally. And then there's inventory with like sizing. And so I'm trying to explain this to a room full of men, and they're kind of like the few who were listening were like, okay. And this happened a lot early on, where a man would say, well, why don't you just partner with Victoria's Secret? And then I'm like, okay. First of all, Victoria's Secret has tried really hard in the last couple of years to be more inclusive in especially sizing, but they have a pretty problematic brand for a lot of women. Yeah. And also, women who have reconstructed breasts do not need push-up bras. Like, my boobs are high and tight, my knee skin sagging, my neck skin sagging, my boobs, they do not need a push-up. And I can say that to you, and I can say that to a room full of women, and women actually already know. And I don't know how to explain to a room full of men that I don't need to partner with Victoria's Secret to make a warming push-up bra for women in the breast cancer community. It just got into this territory. And then as soon as those questions started coming and my answers started making them uncomfortable, more and more of them shut down. And the final feedback was one guy who just was like, you know what, I'm going to talk to my wife and see if she understands this. And I was like, okay. And I understand that like there wasn't a single person in that room who could have really understood the problem, unless maybe their wife had breast cancer or had a preventative mastectomy and had this issue. But I left feeling like so deflated, like I didn't get to not only give my pitch, but that they were so disrespectful, from like the ignoring me to the asking questions before I was finished to like me answering in a way that I thought was like pretty thoughtful and explained well why their thing was a bad idea.
Yeah.
And then they just would shut down. There was no like follow-up questions. And I frankly felt like they weren't really serious about it from the beginning. And then why waste their time and mine?
When you went in, was the pitch like a visual, or was it just you explaining the brand? Like, I'm just trying to picture like, well, one, why they would be so disrespectful, but also, did they give you the space to kind of, because you said you didn't really get to even give the pitch and I get this, like, I feel like I'm picturing, and I don't even know the specifics, but how you get so thrown off that it's almost like herding cats to try to get back to where you were and what you actually wanted to achieve.
Yeah, right. And then it's like almost irrelevant. So yes, there is a visual. You make oftentimes you're required to make what's called a pitch deck. very few businesses now need a traditional business plan that's like a Word document that's written out, that's like 10, 15, 20 pages
Yeah.
long. A
Thank
pitch
God.
deck is like a really short form. Best ones are maybe 10 pages, like really clear, concise, well designed, not too many words, thing that you can click through while you're talking to someone so they can
Yeah.
see, like, well, what would the design look like? Or how does this fit in a bra? Or who is this person? And we had some really cool things in there, like thermographic photos to sort of illustrate the problem for people who can't understand what it feels like. And, I think to your point, when someone starts asking, like bombarding me with questions, which is really what was happening, I ended up answering things out of order. And the storytelling part is so important.
Yeah.
Really, in most businesses now, the idea of storytelling is understood as a really important factor in your success, whether you are fundraising or marketing or just trying to build social media content. And if you start telling a story and it gets interrupted rapidly with a bunch of questions, getting back into the story doesn't make any sense. You're like, well,
Yeah.
forget it. Let's just flip the table and leave.
Yeah,
Burn me at
exactly.
the stake
Teresa.
already.
Yeah. Well, so at the end then, because I'm picturing it's a 10-minute slot and you knew you were getting near the end of it, did you have the opportunity? And I've never been in this type of situation. Like, do you have an ask at the end of it and then it's open conversation? Like, in your mind, how did you picture it going? And then how did it actually go?
Well, the last slide is like, and this is how much money I want, and this is where the money's going. So it's called like a use of funds slide. So
Okay.
you would say, like, we're raising a $1.5 million pre-seed round, and let's say $500,000 of it goes to R&D and manufacturing, and $100,000 goes to marketing. Like, you break down what that money would be used for,
Mm-hmm.
and then you say, like, and like, please let me know if you have questions. And then people typically ask questions, and I don't even know that we got to the slide, to be honest. And the other part, which I hadn't shared, was I had recently started talking to one of the men who's now one of my advisors. He's like an operations and finance person who's lovely. He's my favorite. The guy just loves a spreadsheet. And we had just started talking when this pitch happened. And I had said, I think you should come to this pitch with me. Just, it'll help you, like, see me in action, hear my pitch. So he was in the room. And the other thing that happens, and I think kind of any woman who has a male co-founder or a male colleague or someone who's with them in meetings where the decisions are going to matter, people look to the man.
Such bullshit.
So they asked me all of these questions about, why am I not making a bra? Why am I not doing this? Is this even a thing? Like, grilled me. And then when they wanted to know about the financials, the manufacturing, supply chain, the process, they directed them all at this person who I had spent at that moment maybe 2 hours with. And it was like every problem that you hear about and read about illustrated in like one 15-minute experience.
Oh my gosh. So what happened after? I mean, so thank you for your time. I mean, I picture that you want in your mind to like scream at them, but then you also just kind of want to slide out the door as well. So you left, I'm assuming, and then you just knew it was a flop, right?
Oh, I totally knew it was a flop. They were like, we'll get back to you in the next, like, they told me their process for all of the companies that were pitching that day. And I was like, great, thanks. And then I left, and at that point, I have my pre-ritual listen to Under Pressure. And when I would leave pitches, I always listened to Kesha, and I always got French fries. And then I had to stop doing that because I've gained 15 pounds in the time that I've started this business. So there's no more French fries, disappointment fries. But yeah, I left and was just like, I need to be put into a coma for a minute. You have that feeling you're so deflated. Like, how could I have made that better? How could I have fixed it? And I think what I learned from that experience was just, I shouldn't have been there at all. And that I didn't do my diligence on them. They had invested in maybe 4 women ever, like, and not to say that I couldn't have been the 5th and that wouldn't have helped them trend in the right direction. But it's really important as the founder or the person who's pitching in whatever capacity to know who you're pitching to. And since then, like if I was going to pitch you, Angie, I would have researched you on LinkedIn. I probably would have found your Facebook. I would know that you had kids, that you were married, where you lived, what your favorite color was, if your birthday was yesterday. Like I profile people who I'm pitching now, and not to be a creep, but because I want to know, like, is this person worth talking to? And I did not do that time. And I didn't check who they'd invested in before. I didn't check the size of the checks that they were writing, how long their process was. The idea of angel investors and angel groups is that they write smaller checks faster. So they're like, we know this is high risk. We're going to give you this money. Good luck, peanut. And when you're pitching VCs, there's a very rigorous diligence process and negotiations that come after that. And I learned later that this fund, their diligence process was 18 months. 18 months is insane. Businesses come and go out of business in that amount of time. And at the end of that 18 months, they might still say no. So they might waste your time for like upwards of a year and a half and then still say no. And if I had known all of those things, I wouldn't have even said yes to the meeting.
I mean, that speaks to like the disrespect that you might have gotten in the room when they were not paying attention to you, right? Like it is kind of a disrespectful timeline to go 18 months with someone that actually needs the money and then at the end of it, cut them loose. Is all of that information readily available? Like you can see what they've invested in, their timeline and all of that?
Yeah, and there's different online tools. There's a program called Crunchbase there, and some things you can get a free temporary thing for. Sometimes you have to pay. Sometimes you can find another founder who's paying. There's lots of creative ways to get that information.
Okay.
But it's certainly worth the time. So making like a spreadsheet where you're like, oh, I think these are all the people I want to talk to, and then double checking that they're worth talking to is some of the best time you can spend. Because even if you're like, oh, whatever, that was only 20 minutes. It wasn't good, and you don't get that time back. And then there's 12 people who just sat in a room and watched you whiff it. You know, like if you can avoid all of those things, that's awesome.
Well, and I like that the prep work that you talk about is both the storytelling component and the actual numbers. So if you would have known a little bit more about them personally, then you really could have shifted how you approach them to kind of like, let's cut through this disrespect, them not paying attention. Like you could have level set that somehow in the beginning. And then the numbers too would have told you a story. So no matter what we're pitching, like we have to do the pre-work, but sometimes people only look at numbers. Like even, you know, with us, sometimes you'll see a show that's got a ton of reviews and you expect they have a ton of downloads. But if you don't listen to that a little bit and kind of see like, oh, is their audience actually engaging with them? It may not at all be worth the effort to connect with them and to put yourself out there. So I like that you had both sides of that. Anything else that you learned? Like, did you shift your pitch? Any like other tangible takeaways?
I probably didn't shift the pitch because I didn't have a chance to do it.
Yeah.
I think that after that, had some people who are friends and advisors really grill me and make sure that I had answers to some of the questions that were more thoughtful. Because, you know, every once in a while someone asks me a new question, but that's pretty rare these days, especially. So I wanted to make sure that I had prepped excellent answers for the questions that were common and that I felt confident in having all of those already in the database of my mind. And then if I got a new one, I would have like a little bit of space for like taking a breath before I answer and not getting frustrated or not feeling thrown off. So much of it is them testing you. They want to make sure, and I get it. If someone's going to write you a check for $500,000, they want to know that you have grit, that you're not going to quit, that you're unflappable, that you know, like it's a little bit of a hazing, and I understand that. And I think that meeting probably helped. That was the first time that had happened in that way.
Yeah.
So the prep for the next pitches that came out of that was more like, okay, I just need to like know how to spray on a Teflon coating and have some really excellent boxed answers so I can still be poised and confident and have an answer. Because you know, I've learned that men are allowed to say, I don't have the answer to that, but I will get back to you. And that doesn't always fly when you're a woman. They expect, like, the expectations are just really different.
Yeah.
And saying, I don't know, is almost not allowed.
It's so, I want to dig into a lot more, but I want to be cognizant of time because it is, and this was fascinating when we worked together too, of just the experience of female founders who are asking for money compared to their male counterparts, and just not even like the experiences, the outcomes, the level of investment. Is there anything that you would want to share with our audience generally about that? I think the Teflon coating probably is like the biggest visual.
Yeah, two things I would say. First, don't be scared by the numbers because they are grim. 2 years ago, like 3% of venture funding was going to women, and it's back down to like 1.8%. I have a lot of theories on why that is, but there is absolutely no arguing the point that it is harder for us. We have, even though we have better outcomes, we do more with less. Our success metrics far exceed our male counterparts. Like it's almost comical,
Mm-hmm.
but don't quit. Like if you have a good idea and people who believe in you and you really want to get it done, you will find a way to get it done. And the other thing I would say is thankfully there are more funds that are coming up. More women are being taught how to invest, right? Like we're not just being told that we can donate money and be on boards of nonprofits, which is typically how women who are wealthy engage with their wealth in a way that helps the community. We're finally now being given the tools and permission, which is insane, to make those investments. So there are more women who are doing that, who are educating other women on how to do it. And I think the wealth and power structure is going to start tipping, but we're not there yet. And even though those funds look really exciting and those women are amazing, they are in the same boat that we are as founders. They also have to fundraise to get those funds. They're also getting asked the same difficult questions. They also have to prove with more success than their male counterparts that they're making good investments. So what ends up happening is we're all in this high risk pool together, and all of the women who are founders are competing for the funds from women that are smaller funds that write smaller checks, that are, they're also in this high stress, having to prove it situation. So my point there is only don't ignore the funds that are still not mission driven to support women, because we're all going to these few funds. A lot of the other funds that are run by men or men and women or all of the different genders aren't getting the same female founder deal flow, and they're looking for it. So don't just say like, I'm a woman, I'm making a product in women's health, I can only talk to these funds that support women. Talk to anyone who will talk to you. Do a really excellent job in your talking, and they'll introduce you to the right people.
I love that, because a lot of times, even in our space, we work with female business owners who ideally would love to work with other women business owners. Like that's who their target market is. But I see, even in the podcast guesting space, is that there's a risk of keeping your business siloed to other women audiences. And I think, one thing that we like to do is still pitch outside of women hosted shows for women run businesses. Because if we're doing all of these great things, but it's just happening inside of the silo of women focused businesses, I feel like we're selling ourselves short. We're not actually achieving better representation because the people who are outside of those silos don't see us.
Right. No, it's a really good point. And actually, you're reminding me that one of the podcasts you got me on really early that was for a female audience, a man listened to who had his own podcast, and he invited me to be on his podcast. And he asked such different questions. And when it's not in an investment focused moment, when I get those questions that I think, and maybe you would think, and your audience would think, are kind of stupid questions about women and women's health and whatever, if I'm on a podcast, that's an educational opportunity. And you might not ask me the same dumb question that someone, or I should say like uninformed or
just
someone who lacks the same unexperienced. Yeah. So when I get those questions and I'm on a podcast or I'm talking to a man, it's an opportunity to educate them on what that means and their maybe male audience. So I 100% agree with you.
Yeah, because then you can go back and fill that gap in your marketing or your education so that if Brilliantly, when it does land in front of a man, they get it faster.
Right.
Where is Brilliantly today? So you've been in business over 5 years, right?
Yeah, and I think been in business should be in air quotes, that those really early days of like interviewing women and trying to get on podcasts and establishing myself as a thought leader and community building and starting to do R&D, there really isn't much of a business to run. It's just laying the foundation. So we launched the first version of the product about 2 years ago. I'm thankfully coming to you from a little tiny phone booth in Fort Worth, Texas, where I'm participating in a program called TechStars that's really helping to reshape brilliantly and move it forward through new design manufacturing phases, through finding me strategic partners and the right investors to move it forward. So this is a pretty quiet, publicly facing moment for the business, but a very, very exciting moment behind the scenes.
Yeah. It's been such an honor to watch it unfold and to watch you evolve and unfold as the leader. So thank you for sharing that story with us. I think my listeners are going to love it. Where's the best place for them to connect with you and to follow along with Brilliantly?
Yeah, the best place to find us is on our website. We're brilliantly.co. All of our socials are linked at the bottom. We've been pretty quiet on social media while we're making some strategic pivots. But if you sign up for our mailing list, you will be the first to know about what's going on.
So exciting. So good to see you, Kristen.
Thank you so much for having me.
I hope you loved this episode of Pitched and gained some really actionable how-tos. Spoiler, go do your prep work before you pitch, as well as some inspirational juju. I feel like Kristen has a way of inspiring women to think bigger and do bigger. So I hope that was conveyed even as we talked about a specific moment in her business. That is it for this week and for this first episode of Pitched. I would love to connect with you over on LinkedIn at Angie Trueblood. Go ahead and connect with me, and in the connection request, let me know that you heard this episode. I would love your feedback. I mean, I guess the good, bad, and the ugly. I would prefer to hear your wonderful feedback, but if you have other recommendations, I will take it. And here's the deal. If someone on your team or you are interested in chatting about how my team can pitch you, not for funding, but to be a podcast guest, I would love to chat with you. Hop on over to the podwizegroup.com/services and book some time on my calendar. Okay, friends, until next time, be well and get pitched. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Pitched. If you found this episode to be helpful, friend, you would be blown away by what we can accomplish together. Here are 2 next best steps. 1, be sure to sign up for our bi-weekly newsletter. That is twice a month if that term confuses you as much as it does me. Each week that our episodes drop, I send an action-focused email, including an insider tip of the week based on the work that we do behind the scenes in our clients' business. For example, a recent tip of the week included how to estimate how large a podcast audience is. To get access to this exclusive content, pop on over to the podwizegroup.com/pitches and sign up. As a special thank you, you'll get your first insider tip of the week as access to 6 pitches my team and I have sent that were accepted, including the core components of any great pitch. Number 2, schedule a call with me to figure out which of our services, if any, would be a good fit for you. We have a variety of ways to support you and your team in helping grow your business through podcast guesting, and I am pretty skilled at helping identify pain points and solutions. Hop over to the podwizegroup.com/services and grab a spot on my calendar at the bottom of the page.